Why would you do this to me? Why? So, okay, this video is a year old. But I recently found it. By recently, I mean a couple days ago. I was skimming through Karen's old content, and I found this, and I had to respond because, well, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons. I think this will help to illustrate why I moved away from the men's rights movement, and I also think that there needs to be discussion of men's issues on YouTube, and this is a way to force myself to start making content again. So, here I am, potentially back in business.
Back in 2016, the big internet culture war was between feminists on one side and men's rights activists on the other. Whatever happened to that? These days it's as dead a meme as, I don't know, Harambe.
Sure, because the feminists have pretty much changed tactics from engaging in pitched online battle to identifying and blocking all the men's rights activists from their various social media accounts. This sometimes happens in the space of 2 or 3 tweets that challenge a feminist's assertion, and even occasionally over the dire crime of liking the wrong tweet.
Karen, men's rights versus feminism didn't die as a culture war because you all got blocked on Twitter. Everyone got blocked on Twitter in, 2015. And then got blocked on Twitter again by the new crop of feminists in 2016. And that was happening long before. That's not something that ever actually fit with some kind of pattern. I will tell you that there are 2 things that actually caused this to die outside of it just getting a bit boring and the internet having a short attention span. Now, number 1 was the rise of the alt-right. Now, the MRAs didn't really exactly have a huge amount to do about this. It wasn't necessarily their fault. I mean, it was the fault of the wider anti-social justice sphere platforming them and letting themselves get infiltrated, and then pretending they weren't being infiltrated, and then just straight up buddying with white nationalists. I mean, at one point, Andy Warski was co-hosting with Jean-Francois Gariepi, an open white nationalist. And then he had Richard Spencer to debate known leftist Straughan. That was the most left-wing voice you could find. No. Okay. And that stream was #1 trending on YouTube. This did not start from, the feminists. The feminists did not make the conversation about race and immigration. That was absolutely the antis' fault. And second, this is what the MRAs did have control over. Their response to it, which was to continually just defend the antis on the culture war. Yeah, look how that went out. You just became, second-rate anti-SJW YouTubers. After the anti-SJW sort of scene had already died out. Now you kind of have to be a mouth-breathing MAGA chud, or you just can't be making content anymore. Effectively, it was a sort of a Hegelian dialectic. There's a sort of ostensibly liberal anti-social justice thing, and then the very clear white nationalism fascist content had their own little fight. Both of them died and had their synthesis, which was this very weird Trump cult that's showed up over the past, several years. And that's kind of what you have to be now if you want to be popular on YouTube on the right, is you have to be a weird Trump cultist. And yeah, men's rights doesn't really fit into that. So, what some of us did was we saw this coming from a lot further away than most of you did, i.e. the young people, and we said, fuck this, we're out, and started having to argue with, actual fascists that racism is bad. Because the problem is that a lot of us were trying to argue that men's issues were important from an anti-discrimination perspective, and when people thought discrimination was okay, they no longer could use that perspective to argue. So, I took it upon myself to want to get rid of this, like, weird, insane, basically neo-Nazi movement on YouTube, because it really wasn't productive for anyone, let alone men's issues. Now, I think because at least the Nazi thing on YouTube is dead, this sort of conversation can start to pick up again. And it probably could have been picked up a little earlier than like a year after this video was posted. But I have a life, what can I say? So yeah, it's kind of the MRA's fault for not growing with the times and staying perpetually in 2015. You didn't grow with the actual online culture. You stayed there and tried to do some like pale shadow of the content that you used to. The conversations moved forwards. Move with it.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Personally, I dream of the day that feminists are so confined to their echo chambers they might as well all be living in a commune on the island of Elba.
This is what I mean. You're just perpetually 5 years ago. There's an entire leftist debate bro genre on YouTube. And there was in 2017. Destiny was a thing in 2017. The idea that like there was this feminist echo chamber that's slowly encompassing the entire left, and then nobody will ever talk to them again, is completely and utterly ridiculous. And it was ridiculous in 2017, and it was especially ridiculous in 2019. And like this video has only aged worse. You just aren't moving forwards anymore.
I did want to do the fedora, though. Every YouTuber who's ever covered the men's rights movement has done the fedora, and I wanted to put my own little twist on it. My wardrobe notes for this video say, MRA femme fatale and fedora but make it fashion. School shooter realness. I feel like I'm also serving a little, red-pilled Carmen Sandiego.
Which raises an intriguing question. Where in the world, or more precisely, in what reality are you living? But leave it to you to have wardrobe notes for a video allegedly focused on ideas. Stunning and brave.
Okay, confession. When I first saw the Contrapoints men video, there was a part of me that started thinking about a couple minutes into it, holy shit, Contra, please get to a point already. However, remember when anti-SJWs, like, tried to understand the concept of making a video entertaining and fun and filling it with jokes and memes? Yeah, I remember. But this is just catty. Like, Jesus Christ, the next, like, 10 minutes of this video is just, like, making, really backhanded comments at Contrapoints and, like, her aesthetic and stuff. And it's so just, it's just mean. Like, I mean, like, the name Karen is fitting. That's all I can say.
Look, gentlemen, let's be rational. And we're fooling around, okay? Part 1. Oh, wait. Rational.
I know you poo-pooed this whole thing earlier, but I'm gonna say it right here. Men are more rational in general than women.
No, I'm gonna give a big citation needed on that one. This is gonna be a Karen rant about something she read on a Red Pill forum 6 years ago, isn't it? Oh my god, this is gonna be amazing. I haven't heard one of these in years.
This is not because women are incapable of rationality, but because they are more emotionally sensitive and less emotionally stable.
No, men are not less sensitive than women. And they're definitely not more emotionally stable. I'm telling you this now. Most guys I know are, like, very often close to their breaking point on a multitude of issues. And you can tell that the average guy is actually very sensitive. It's just that what they're sensitive about and what they're desensitized to, so that it doesn't actually look like they're sensitive, are, like, they're different things to what women are desensitized to or sensitive about. All you need to do is be a woman and give a man a compliment on his appearance, and he will take that to his grave. because that is a form of sensitivity. He doesn't get compliments very often, so he's going to remember that, right? That is not being insensitive. Okay, now, when it comes to emotional stability, here's a good example. Who is the first to spring into action at the first sign of a threat? That's probably a man. That is not emotional stability. That is a form of instability that is not, like, generally perceived as emotional instability. And honestly, a lot of guys are, like, close to roping and don't tell anyone. That doesn't mean that they are emotionally stable. That just means that they aren't telling anyone about the fact that they're emotionally unstable. So, yeah, no.
This is at least in part a function of biology. Just ask your teammate, Theron. When she first went on estrogen, she'd start bawling at things that wouldn't have even fazed her before. She might not have even noticed them. A change that did not take place during months of presenting as female, but immediately upon taking cross-sex hormones. Meanwhile, biological females transitioning hormonally to men report that even when the situation merits crying, it just doesn't happen.
This is one of the most disappointing points, and I didn't really think I'd get this angry at it. You should know better than this, Karen. Men do not necessarily respond the same way to emotional stimuli that women do on average. When it comes to crying, it is physiologically harder for the average man to cry than the average woman, because we just produce less tears. And this is due to hormone production. We don't know exactly the mechanism by which, but what we do know is that lack of androgens or estrogens, they do affect how many tears you produce. So it is literally easier to cry if you suddenly take estrogen, and that's not because you're now suddenly sadder at something. It's literally because it's a response from the exact same feeling. And the thing is, that of all people, an MRA should be good at this. That expressing emotions is different for men than women. That men's pain is not as well recognised, and that we should do something about that. But here, you're just claiming that men just don't suffer as much. Which really, like, fucks up the MRA point, doesn't it? No, men are suffering just as much as women, if not more. I don't fucking know at this point. But what I can tell you is that the idea that crying less means we're suffering less from a certain situation is complete and utter bullshit, and, like, that is, like, MRA rhetoric 101. Why is the lib soy cuck leftist turncoat doing better at this than the person who's stayed in MRA for this long? It turns out you haven't actually stopped, you haven't, like, not changed, it's that you've just gotten worse. You've dropped the MRA stuff and just become a fucking red pillar. It's embarrassing.
We have the literal 1% complaining about anti-rich prejudice.
You do realize that anti-rich prejudice...
No, don't try and actually justify the concept of anti-rich prejudice. There are plenty of perfectly legitimate reasons to hate the current corporatist structure, and also to have some level of resentment to the types of people who have very open contempt for the poor and treat us like cogs in a machine that are being disobedient. Yeah. Now, like, all I'm gonna say is stop playing into the stereotype your name is literally Karen.
And so, of course, because there was women's rights, there has to be men's rights too.
Actually, no. That's not why. The reason why there has to be men's rights is because certain rights others are entitled to are either not granted to men at all, or are regularly infringed by law and policy.
So, no, but yeah, See, this is being, like, needlessly contrarian at this point.
I've been hearing about men's rights for my whole adult life, and I've always been very skeptical, because in my experience, online men's rights activism in practice always looks like this. Women try to do a good thing to solve a real problem, and then a man shows up to say, well, what about men?
A real problem for both sexes that is being portrayed as a gendered problem targeting women specifically?
I will grant this. Jumping into a conversation when the exclusive discussion is about one side of an issue, and then pointing out that there is this whole other side that no one seems to be talking about, is absolutely a perfectly valid complaint. That, yeah, what about the men is a valid complaint when literally nobody is talking about the men. Now, in this case where it's like a guy with a single tweet saying men get harassed too, yeah, he's maybe not, like solving the problem of men's harassment, but, like, he's a dude with 2 likes on his tweet. What the fuck do you think he's gonna do? He's a nobody. But the, vast number of organizations and media organizations and stuff that are talking about this, if they were also talking about how men are also harassed online, maybe that would be something. And how do you convince them to start talking about how men are also harassed online? You criticize them. So, I mean, that I have always found the what about the mensing annoying, because if you talk about exclusively men's issues, then you start getting what about the womensing. And there's plenty of spaces to talk about women's issues, so they don't even have that complaint. So, yeah, I just find it an incredibly hypocritical and mostly invalid complaint about men's issues discussion.
For this video, I decided to actually do some research for once, and the first thing I did was read the foundational text of the modern men's rights movement, which is The Myth of Male Power by Warren Farrell. Actually, I listened to the audiobook because, let's be honest, reading is hard. But as I was listening, I admit I thought it made more sense than I was expecting it to. Basically, Farrell says that second-wave feminists rightly fought against the traditional gender role that confined women to domestic servitude.
That role only ever existed for about 100 years.
Yes, and it sucked. This is the problem with, like, the honey badger, wing of the men's rights movement, is there was this consistent obsession with being so aggressively contrarian about any time that there was a claim that women get a bad deal out of anything. Yeah, okay, technically patriarchal gender roles and even the gender roles that resulted from the Industrial Revolution were intended to give men and women the best deal they possibly could, and especially women in certain areas. But that doesn't change the fact that it still kind of sucked for a lot of people, and they are glad they don't have to do it anymore. Like, stop doing this. You don't have to do this to advocate for men. This is just advocating against women, but some, like, vague anti-feminist sentiments. This is just, like, why? What does this achieve outside of, you know, feeling like an edgelord on the internet?
But he argues that the feminist idea that men have all the power in society is actually an illusion, because the traditional gender role for men is just as oppressive.
That is the argument presented by the men's rights movement for over a century. Oh yeah, you didn't know that the men's rights movement is over a century. Oh yeah, go look up the book, The Legal Subjugation of Men by Ernest Beltford Bax. It was written in 1908. Ernest Beltford Bax was an English socialist and the first MRA. Yeah, the first MRA was a fucking socialist. And he made basically that point, that the gender role for men is oppressive too, and maybe we need to do something about it. And for 100 years, we've been trying to convince the feminist movement that maybe there's a point to be had there, and now a popular feminist YouTuber has come out and said this. Basically, oh actually, you know what, maybe there's a point here. How is Karen going to reply?
No, I don't think that's what he's arguing. He's arguing that women have power over men.
You're a straw man of yourself. Yeah, women have power over men, and therefore they can enforce gender stereotypes onto men that are just as oppressive as the gender stereotypes that men can force onto women. It's not that hard to figure out. This aggressive contrarianism, it doesn't work for you, Karen. It just doesn't. This is pathetic.
He introduces the idea of male disposability, basically the idea that society values female lives more than male lives, which are seen as expendable in the service of protecting and providing for women and children. And he points to statistics showing that men make up the majority of military casualties, workplace fatalities, murder victims, suicides, and so on. So we're supposed to conclude that even though at first it looks like men have more power than women, in fact, the queens have a certain kind of privilege in being protected and provided for by the expendable male worker bees. And I guess that kind of makes sense. I feel like I can at least empathize with the point of view. What I'm saying is, I took the red pill and I rubbed it on my
Oh god. This is a function of biological imperatives and sex differences in reproductive costs, benefits, and risks.
That was a perfectly accurate explanation of the men's rights activists' complaint on the male gender role, including pervasive female privilege. And you're now arguing against it. You're now arguing not against feminism, but against Warren Farrell, because he doesn't have some weird red pill patriarchy justifying theory behind it. We've gone so far off the fucking deep end, and the problem is I don't know when it happened.
They're disposable in the reproductive sense, and we, individually and collectively, are the product of those who passed on their genes. When the future is female t-shirts inspired by a woman who endorsed a program of eugenics to cull the male population to 10% of all humans are available for purchase and worn in public, I'm sorry! I have to wonder just how much we value men and male life.
But who are you arguing with now? Contrapoints just agreed with Warren Farrell that, male disposability is a thing. So what is this rant about now?
But some initial objections come to mind. Haven't men been almost all of the kings, presidents, and CEOs for millennia? Didn't men make up all these rules in the first place? I don't know, boys. Still seems kind of patriarchal to me.
Sure. Men's rights activists aren't going to tell you that the people who held the most formal power historically weren't men.
Okay, so I'm going to show 3 separate takes from Karen. 2 are from this individual rant, and 1 is actually from earlier in the video. Because it shows how much of an internally inconsistent mess her rhetoric is. And the reason it's so inconsistent is because she's trying to do this lip service to men's rights while actually being a tradcon red pillar. Now let's go.
We might tell you that the people who made all the rules historically were not comprised only of men.
Take number 1. Women have always played a part in running society.
Do you like history, boys? How did Rome fall again? Was it the gays?
No, it was the feminism. Wouldn't you know it, giving women equal political rights and social status tends to collapse civilizations? Too edgy? Not historically accurate? Who cares, as long as the production values are high?
Women having too much political power destroying societies is an ahistorical meme. You cut out a little bit there because she goes on for fucking ages.
Without patriarchy, nothing visible on screen in your video would exist, and no one outside of that room, if the room itself even existed, would have any way to look at you lounging there in your underpants. Camille Paglia once famously said that if civilization had been left in female hands, we'd all be living in grass huts. I view that as optimistic. Look to the bonobos if you want to see the results of a matriarchal trajectory. 10 to 20,000 individuals who survive only because of human protection, and who'll be dead or assimilated the moment the Congo dries up or their northern neighbors, common chimpanzees, ever learn to swim. At which point, I will suggest to feminists determined to dismantle the patriarchy, be careful what you wish for.
And apparently, feminism dismantling the patriarchy and destroying society by giving women political power is a thing that actually happens. But it's also a historical meme, and also women have always had a fuck ton of political power. Like, what the fuck, Karen? This is all completely and utterly self-contradictory. Like, pick one. And this is all an attempt because, number one, Karen doesn't actually have a coherent view of men's issues, or patriarchy, or gender roles. She consistently tries to bring up how men suffer under the system and then seeks to present zero issues when it comes to actual solutions to this, because she can't actually move out of thinking that the patriarchal system is justified and is necessary because it sort of low-key will destroy societies. And at the end of the day, that's not true. And because the feminist here is the one who's actually presenting a critical view of the current system and potentially some way out of it, they are actually doing men's rights better than you. And that's coming from, David Scherer, Spinosauruskin, is saying a feminist is doing men's rights activism better than Karen Straughan. So you know it fucking means something. And you know what? This is why I wanted to start doing content again. Because no one's fucking doing this. I mean, Contrapoints did that one video a year ago. But at the end of the day, we need more content than that. And I just don't think there really has been enough. And if this is the only other option on the right, then Jesus Christ, I needed to come here a year ago. See, there are genuine complaints about Contrapoints' video that I have. So, there's actually two main ones. Now, number one is there's a little bit of a contradiction between when Contrapoint says, oh yeah, men are being oppressed by gender roles, and then later goes on to say that men are suffering from existential angst because they aren't being oppressed. Like, that seems to be a bit confusing. However, the main one I have is that the actual, serious issues, when it comes to actual legal discrimination, aren't really discussed. Like, things like genital mutilation, or the lack of support for male victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, or police discrimination, or discrimination in education, and stuff like that. Like, there are a lot of areas you can actually go into, especially when it comes to fathers' rights. Like, Jesus Christ. And those are issues that weren't really discussed by the video, and I think if you're going to discuss the men's rights movement, it might be worth discussing the rights they want men to have. However, it's still the most sympathetic video I've ever seen on men's issues from a feminist, ever. And that needs to be said again. And the problem is that, someone needs to do content about this stuff. So here I am.